Okay, it's 1902, so I think people will still be coming through, I'm sure, but we'll make a start. So good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Powell. I'm the chair of the Ancient Tree Forum. And I welcome you to the conversation and the webinar tonight. It's going to be a good subject, and hopefully you'll learn a lot as we go through. I'd like to thank everybody that for joining the webinar, but also for those that made a donation to ATF. Huge thank you for that. Your donations are fairly critical to help support the work of the ATF, not only in safeguarding and ancient and veteran trees for the future generations, but also in enabling us to work with lots of experts and knowledgeable organisations and people to make sure that we're keeping information and knowledge and research and support going through as well. So thank you for those donations. You can, as at the end, we will be sending out a questionnaire to make sure that you've enjoyed the webinar, and there'll be a link on that to gift aid, so you'll be able to support even more by just filling in the gift aid form, and that would be fantastic. We're going to have a 20-minute presentation from Dr. Beth Brockett of Forest Research. After that, we'll have a Q&A. And we've got a panel of experts, including Beth, but also Nigel Pilling from Natural England. So welcome to Nigel. Also Tom Hill and Luke Barley, both ATF trustees, but also work in trees for the National Trust. So a lot of people working with a lot in the agenda, as it were. So it'll be a good question and answer session, I hope. Please use that chat function too, we'll capture your questions as we go through. I'll hand over now to Tom, who's going to introduce Beth, and then we'll start the seminar from now. So Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm not normally one for a shameless plug, but you might notice my lovely new Ancient Tree Forum t-shirt here. Just saying that you can get these off of our website, and they're all made from sustainable sources, and yeah, great to rock around in public, showing off your appreciation for ancient trees. Anyway, on to our main subject today. So thanks, Richard, and yeah, it's a real pleasure for me to introduce our main guest speaker tonight. Beth Brockett, a senior social scientist, has previously worked with Natural England, and she currently works with Forest Research, heading up their Society and Environment Research Group, which she joined in 2023. Her dedicated team of researchers and projects investigate our social values in connection to the natural environment in the hope of informing more effective land management decisions and strategies and policy approaches, and all based on scientific evidence. The papers and innovative research projects that Beth has contributed to over the years have included work to understand how ethnicity and cultural factors influence our use of green spaces, and the difference in how older and newer woodlands affect our well-being when we visit them for recreation. More recently, Beth's specialist team have had a focus on the often overlooked area of trees outside of woodlands in peri-urban and rural settings. So scattered trees thought to make up as much as 30% of the UK's canopy overall, and including many individual mature, ancient and veteran trees in their ranks. This work's begun to explore how these alternative cohorts of trees are vital in inspiring communities, creativity and young people, as well as looking at societal attitudes towards the often maligned sycamore tree. And moving to this evening's topic, Beth has also led a special strand of work under that umbrella that aims to shine a light on how people these days view deadwood and decay, our most favourite of subjects. I met Beth through my day job with National Trust, where I helped to look after the veteran tree collection at Stowe Park in Buckinghamshire. And that was a site which formed part of her study, and it's one with a rich history and a long, thriving saproxylic invertebrate population. It's also a place where formal design and straight lines intersect with some of nature's wonkier and more ephemeral forms, including the ancient fairy oak, which is thought to be as old as 700 years there and the oldest of their trees. So we thought that as followers of the Ancient Tree Forum, aka the Deadwood Appreciation Society, that you guys might be interested to hear a bit more about Beth's team's findings and their approach to this study. So it's over to Beth now to tell us a bit more. Beth, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks very much, Tom. That's very kind of you. Right, I will share my screen so you can all see some slides. Is that coming through? That people see that?
There we go. Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah.
You just click on slideshow, then we'll be in business. Yeah.
Lovely. I'm just going to try and get rid of this band at the top. There we go. Right. Excellent. Okay. So yeah, thanks again, Tom, for that introduction, and thanks very much to the Ancient Tree Forum, or the what was it, Dead and Decaying Wood fans, for inviting me to speak this evening. You might hear I've got a bit of a cold, so I've got a number of cough sweets unwrapped in front of me, so just forgive me if I have to stop and cough a bit. So I'm Beth Brockett. As Tom said, I work for Forest Research, and I'm going to be presenting for you today on dead and decaying trees in the landscape, understanding visitor perceptions to support management decisions. So to start briefly, who is Forest Research? We're the main research provider for the trees, woodlands and forestry sector in Great Britain. We're a government agency, and we deliver policy and practice relevant research across many different disciplines. And we also work with academic collaborators. And we've got research stations near Edinburgh in Surrey and a number of other hubs across England, Scotland and Wales. And there's a link to our website in the chat, and I think Jenny's going to be populating the chat with these links as we go through. Thanks, Jenny. As Tom said, I'm a senior social scientist in the Society and Environment Research Group. We're a team of social scientists who have a range of disciplinary backgrounds, such as human geography, psychology, behavioural science, sociology and anthropology. And we deliver research across a number of themes, including well-being and access to forests and trees, human dimensions of wildlife and wildlife management, forest disturbance, including the social dimensions of tree health, and understanding and working with land managers and land management.
Beth,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. The slides are not progressing. I think you need to go into slideshow and start the slideshow. So at the top of the screen, there's a band called slideshow, and then if you press start from beginning, that hopefully will take you into.
Okay, I've only got the moment end slideshow or display settings. Okay, it's very strange because I can see them moving on my screen.
There we go. There we go. It looks like it's on its way now. We're on slide 3.
Okay, right.
We've got all your notes as well, so I don't know whether you can to change it to display settings.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
That better?
That's better. That's perfect.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be good. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you for letting me know. Teams is a mystery to me. Oh, Zoom actually, even more of a mystery. So sorry about that, but you haven't been able to see my lovely pictures. But these are my pictures where I was explaining about the different themes that we work on. Sorry, I'm gonna have to look slightly to the left now because that's where my notes are. So apologies about that. So that's just an outline of what we do in the Society and Environment Research Group. And then I thought it would be helpful to use one slide to explain what environmental social science is. And this slide was created by the Access Partnership, which we belong to. And it's a multi-organisational programme of work which is promoting the use of social sciences in tackling the environmental issues we face. And it gives an explanation here of what environmental social science is. So it's the systematic study of the interrelationship between 3 dynamic components: people, so including their thoughts, actions and experiences; the social environment, including social systems, values, norms, cultures, institutions and political systems; and the natural environment, including natural resources and environmental problems such as air pollution. And we need environmental social sciences to tackle our tricky environmental problems because ultimately, largely, they're human problems, aren't they? They're caused by humans, and we're also concerned about how humans experience them, because often it's the most vulnerable members of our society that are most severely affected. So now on to the research project, which is why you're all here. So this piece of work was part of a wider programme of research, which Tom mentioned at the beginning, which looked at the social and cultural values of trees outside of woodland. Now, social and cultural values are shared ways of thinking, feeling, behaving, responding to, and communicating about the value of something. In this case, trees, or more specifically for this presentation, dead and decaying trees. And I'm sure I don't need to tell this audience that dead and decaying trees are ecologically valuable. They're important for nutrient cycling and they're an important carbon store. However, site managers tell us that they are often uncertain as to how visitors feel about them and whether a small number of vocal visitors who are negative about the presence of such trees are representative of wider feeling. And this uncertainty is affecting their management decisions. So we undertook some empirical research to understand how do visitors perceive dead and decaying trees in the landscape, and we wanted to know, how do visitors respond to them? Do visitors value them differently to trees and woodlands more generally? How do people's knowledge about the ecosystem services derived from these trees affect their response? And are these responses affected by how formal the landscape is? And what are visitors' primary concerns, if they have any, about such trees being left in the landscape or any benefits that they confer? And finally, does the cause of death or decay play a role in these responses? So in terms of the methods, we delivered a pilot survey in a semi-natural setting, which was wood pasture in Rydal in the Lake District National Park. And we interviewed 65 visitors. And we used the findings to develop the main questionnaire. And Nigel and his colleagues from Natural England were involved in that pilot. And we had support from National Trust, who managed some of the land in the area. And the main questionnaire survey was delivered to visitors across 3 locations in August 2024. There were nearly 1,200 respondents across the locations and roughly equal numbers, as you can see, across the 3 sites. And the 3 locations varied in how formal or natural they were. So like Tom mentioned at the beginning, we had the landscape gardens, Stowe Gardens in Buckinghamshire, owned by the National Trust. Then sort of in the middle, we had woodland pastures at Rydal in the Lake District. And then at the other end, the rewilding project at the Knepp Estate in West Sussex. And all questionnaire interviews were undertaken on site with dead and or decaying trees visible to the respondent. And we tested responses for the influence of key variables. So things like, or what we thought would be key variables. So demographic information, so things like age and gender, why they were visiting the site itself, the weather at the time of interview, how much they knew about the environmental benefits or ecosystem services conferred by these trees, and the participant nature relatedness score, which I'll explain in a minute. Oh, actually, I'll explain it now. The nature relatedness scores are calculated for each participant through analysis of responses to a set of 6 tested statements about nature, and that's all based on published research. So I'll present some highlights from our findings. There'll be various links in the chat if you want to get more in depth. And when I mention differences, these are statistically significant differences. And just to remind you that all the interviews were conducted in sight of 1 or more dead or decaying trees. So most people felt neutral or slightly happy when asked about how the tree or trees they could see made them feel, with over 3/4 neutral, happy or very happy. So I think that indicates that site managers can feel confident that the majority of visitors do not have negative responses to seeing these trees in the landscape. Those with higher nature relatedness scores were generally more positive, as you might expect, and those in the oldest age category, 85 plus, were generally more negative. And in terms of site differences, overall visitors to Knepp which is the least formal site, felt most positive about the trees relative to the other sites, and those from Stowe, which is the most formal site, least positive. But it's really important to note that visitors to Stowe were still more positive overall about these trees. So those are the only variables that significantly affected responses to that question. Visitors across all sites were more likely to say that those dead or decaying trees shouldn't be removed. Although, again, visitors to Stowe were more likely to believe that the landowner shouldn't remove the tree, and visitors to Stowe were more likely than visitors to other sites to believe the landowner should remove the tree. Visitors to Knepp were more likely to say that they shouldn't remove the tree. So it's a similar pattern before, but generally, most people say that those trees shouldn't be removed. And site wasn't a significant variable in any of the other responses I'm going to talk about. We then asked respondents, what do you notice about dead and decaying trees in the landscape? And this was an open question, which was subsequently assigned a category. And the large majority, over 90% of respondents, do notice these trees. And they were most were likely to notice their shape, their structure and patterns, regrowth and things growing on them, and how they contrast with living or healthy trees. Negative attributes were much less likely to be noticed, as you can see at the bottom of that graph. And nearly 2/3 want to see more of these trees in the landscape. We asked people if the landowner should retain or remove the dead or decaying tree, the one that they could see. And this slide shows the reasons people gave as to why they thought the landowner should retain or remove the tree. This was also an open question, which was subsequently assigned a category. And we created a knowledge score for each respondent, where we counted how many unique ecosystem services were mentioned by the participant across responses to 2 relevant questions, including this one. 16, and the results surprised me a bit. So 16% didn't mention any ecosystem services, 60% mentioned 1 or 2 ecosystem services, and nearly a quarter mentioned 3 or more, which I think is actually quite impressive. And just to note, we didn't use the term ecosystem services in the interview, but for reference, one commonly used definition is on the screen. It's the benefits that people and society receive from the natural environment. So it's things like food, flood management, recreation, and nutrient cycling. Those are examples. So how knowledgeable people were about the ecosystem services provided by these dead and decaying trees significantly affected how that tree made them feel, with those who are least knowledgeable more likely to feel unhappy or very unhappy about the tree. Remember the graph with the faces. It also affected their responses to tree removal, because those that had no knowledge of the ecosystem service benefits were more likely to suggest the tree would be removed. And this knowledge score was also significant regarding what they noticed. If you remember back to the previous slide, that list of things that people notice about these trees. So to summarise at this point, generally visitors are more knowledgeable about the benefits derived from these trees than might be expected. How knowledgeable people were affected how the tree made them feel, whether it should be removed, what they noticed about them and whether they noticed it, and also their concerns about such trees, which I'll come on to in a bit. So it's indicating that directing resource into educating visitors about the benefits, especially for those with least knowledge, could improve overall visitor positivity towards these trees. Another of our research questions was, do visitors value dead and decaying trees differently to trees and woodlands more generally? And to assess this, we asked respondents to score how highly they valued or did not value dead and decaying trees against 5 statements shown on this slide. And these statements were developed and tested by my colleague Liz O'Brien and others in my team as being a robust and concise representation of the range of social and cultural values people hold in relation to trees and woodlands. There's actually a longer list of 19 statements, but they've also tested using just these 5, because going through 19 statements takes quite some time if you're keeping people on a path. So Liz tested these statements with a representative sample of 5,000 people across England, and the link to her publications at the bottom of this slide and be added to the chat. So she specifically asked whether people value trees and woodlands in general, In this project, we asked whether they value dead and decaying trees. We then compared the results and found there's some indication that dead and decaying trees are less valued than trees and woodlands overall. People are more likely to strongly agree that trees and woodlands generally are important for wildlife, for their mental well-being and providing places to spend time with friends and family compared to dead and decaying trees. However, both types of trees or treescape scored similarly in relation to helping people feel creative and inspired, and also helping them to learn more about nature. Indeed, nearly half of the respondents agreed that dead and decaying trees made them feel creative and inspired. I think something that's beautifully illustrated by this picture here, which is included in one of our other programme outputs. In the pilot phase, we identified specific risks and concerns people had about leaving such trees in the landscape. And in the main study, we then asked participants to rate how concerned they were about each of these. So if I just read them out in case they're quite small text. So it's spread of disease or pests, safety hazards, messiness or untidiness, ugliness, blocking access for visitors, and concern for the tree itself. So respondents were most concerned about dead and decaying trees spreading diseases or pests to other trees. So just under half were concerned or very concerned, and then just over 40% were concerned about them being a safety hazard. But that still means that less than half were actually concerned about these things at all, which I was quite surprised at. Participants were least concerned about the trees being ugly or messy and untidy, so that's around 5%, so a really small percentage. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, knowledge of ecosystem services delivered by these trees affected people's level of concern. So those with the lowest knowledge score consistently most likely to report concern across all of those statements, except for concern for the tree itself. So our results indicate that site managers should feel confident that leaving dead and decaying trees in place in the landscape will positively contribute to visitor experience, and that visitors would largely be receptive to sites highlighting and even celebrating these dead and decaying trees, particularly as creative inspiration and as opportunities to learn. So investing and communicating with those least knowledgeable about these trees could be a good investment, potentially leading to higher visitor support overall for leaving these trees to decay in place. Visitors were most concerned about implications for the spread of tree pests and diseases, so more education specifically addressing this and explaining that it has been a consideration in deciding to leave these trees could prove helpful for site managers. And a reminder that we found across a range of social and cultural values that dead and decaying trees are valued differently to trees and woodlands more generally, but actually they're valued in similar ways for creativity and learning opportunities. So we've been presenting these findings to different practitioner and policy groups, and we've got a briefing paper available on the project webpage. There's a QR code on the slide and a link in the chat. And if you really want to delve into the details of this, the full project report is in section 4 of the programme report, and there's a link in the chat to that as well. And managers have reported to us that this has given them the confidence to leave more of these trees to decay in place, and evidence to suggest management changes to colleagues who may have been recalcitrant about leaving more of these trees on site because they're concerned about what visitors will think. So just to leave you with a reminder that these sites are all in rural situations, it'd be interesting and useful for managers of urban sites, I think, if we could repeat this in an urban or peri-urban context. And I think it would also be useful to dig into whether seeing multiple dead and decaying trees, maybe like at the stand level, changes responses. We hypothesise that it may. And we're also hoping to feed our learning into proposed research on how communities view active management of their local woodlands. So interested to hear if people have got other ideas of how we could use this research, develop it, and certainly if there's any ideas for follow-on funding. As Tom mentioned at the beginning, this was part of a broader project on social and cultural values and trees outside of woodland. And I wanted to flag some of the other outputs from this programme of work, including this is a screenshot of an interactive explainer. There's a link to it in the chat. And the idea of this was to promote understanding of the different values frameworks that exist that have been developed to try and take account of social and cultural values in relation to the natural world and how to work with them in different situations. And I think this is useful for anyone making decisions about trees who wants to properly consider the social and cultural values that in that decision-making process. And it is quite fun to explore, so I do encourage people to have a look. And we work with collaborators from a range of universities and consultancies to deliver multidisciplinary outputs as part of this broader programme. On the webpage, there are links to some podcasts, a photo essay, and a really, I think, this is a really wonderful animated video from our research with children, which is great if you want to sit down over a cuppa. And these lovely paintings shown on earlier slides are from one of the outputs. The QR for the overall project webpage is here, and there's a link in the chat as well. And I just want to say thanks very much to everyone involved in this project, particularly Grace van der Wielen and Jen Clements, who worked on it with me, Altea and Graciela at BIOS, who delivered the statistical analysis, the site owners and participants, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Thanks very much. I'll try and stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Beth. That was fantastic. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. It was really, really interesting, and the sort of juxtaposition of people's thoughts and understanding of trees and the atmosphere is something that I know we all think of quite a lot. But to see that research coming together is really good, and I'm sure there's more we can do as we go forward. But thank you, Beth. We're going to pull together a panel, including Beth, so we can ask some questions. But we're going to introduce Nigel Pilling from Natural England, who Nigel has also got a cold, but hopefully will croak through any questions that come through for Nigel, and also Luke and Tom from the National Trust, both ATF trustees, but both very, very knowledgeable on trees and managing trees without a doubt. So you have quite a strong panel to answer some of the questions that you'd like to put. Do use the chat, and we'll collect those together. So if you have any questions for any of the panel, but certainly for Beth and her research, then do start to put them into the chat, as it were. And whilst we collate some of those questions, I'll just throw one in to start us off. I thought it was fascinating looking at the data about how people sort of feel that trees could be disease ridden to other trees, as it were. That was quite a strong one, wasn't it? And so that struck me as a real sort of education point, because there's an element of, yes, there will be some transfer of disease if they're climate change and sort of disease organism species like, so the oak decline, etc. But really there isn't a lot of movement of disease between and a difference between disease and ancient. So that struck me as a bit of an education process to go. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that while we collect the questions then. Beth.
Yeah, I thought it was a really strong finding, and I think it's something that would be useful to look into more. My colleague Mariella Marzano does do an awful lot of work on the social dimensions of tree pests and diseases. So I'd encourage people to have a look at our webpage and have a look at some of that work. But yeah, there is that link in people's minds between the idea of these dead and decaying trees and this. And I think it represents sort of an increased cognizance in the population around this idea that we've got these problematic tree pests and diseases. So that's good in a way, but it's then sort of making that automatic link to the trees that they're seeing that have been left there purposefully. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Thank you. Luke, Tom, I don't know if you have any sort of anecdotal sort of thought from National Trust visitors, because obviously they're with 6 million members, there's quite a large chunk of the population in some respects that would be in the countryside. Do you hear this on the estates, as it were?
Yeah, it's definitely a consideration. I think people if people don't understand something, often they can attach fear to that. And I think that's one of the things we see generally. I'm sure many people on this webinar can appreciate that, is that, yeah, a lot of decisions about trees are made on the basis of a fear or a lack of information or understanding, which can sound like I'm kind of being negative, but actually, yeah, it's perhaps not people's fault that they don't know this, but actually, most of the trees that people do encounter, and bearing in mind that most people, I think it's 90% of people in the UK live in urban areas, most of the trees they do encounter are young trees. So what we're used to are young trees, and I think that, of course, Ancient Tree Forum and its partners understand that actually the older a tree is around, the greater value it brings, typically to people and that cultural value, but also to wildlife as well. And so it's trying to help people pass that step that yes, trees do look different and more irregular when they're older, but actually most of the time there's nothing to be afraid of there. Far from it. Yeah, you can convert that into appreciation as many as of us have. But yeah, I think in terms of National Trust visitors, 6 million members I think we have, and it really does represent like a wide cross section of different attitudes in the UK. And I think that whilst we do have people that complain about the untidiness in their view of dead wood being left, actually there's a lot more messaging these days and a lot more education about natural processes, which is really positive to see. And I think these kind of trees have a really big role to play in helping to exhibit that.
Thanks, Tom. Sally did mention in the question that she'd be interested to hear the comparison between public responses of sites like Knepp and Stowe versus sort of council-owned green spaces or affluent areas and public responses. And I think both of you have just sort of, in some respects, tapped into that. And it's another set of response or another set of research that we perhaps ought to do going forward. Is understanding where they see the trees and whether the response is a visit or whether the response is in an area where they live. If you see what I mean. Couple of other questions. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, that's true. And I just noticed sort of a question fly up in the screen that someone asked about how representative was of the public at large.
Yes.
So these were visitors to these sites. So it's obviously, this is not the general public. These are subsection of the public, but it's a subsection of the public that managers are most interested in learning about. But we did have a good range of demographic spread. So we looked at sort of the spread of age and ethnicity, and probably less, as you might expect. And as we know from the People and Nature Survey, which I used to work on, we do have an issue with sort of being able to encourage certain groups into green spaces, but yeah, I would say generally it was quite a good spread, but it's not the general public, it's a subsection of the public.
Thank you. Mike Appleton asked that with the information that you've gained, how can I, as a woodland officer in the Yorkshire Dales, for instance, encourage landowners to leave dead trees standing? It's a real battle, and there seems to be almost a sort of a Victorian gardening attitude of clearing everything up, whether it's dead or not in some respects, and even if they're still standing. Is it just a case of education, or is there a sort of a difficult decision in changing attitudes, as it were? And the sort of sterilisation of the countryside is an issue, as it were. What are your thoughts on being able to work with landowners to hold and trees? Do you have experience of people following you at, say, Luke, with the National Trust, or do you have a problem influencing landowners, or how? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a challenging one for us at the National Trust, actually, because we are not a campaigning organisation. Our primary objective is to manage our own land, albeit that we do try to influence sort of wider policy and legislation and inspire people. I have great sympathy, actually, with people who might have a dead tree in their garden and are concerned about it. That's very different, isn't it, from us on the National Trust estate, managing dead trees in fields or parkland or woods. So I think I really do have a lot of sympathy there, actually, with that being much more of a challenge for the person who's asked the question in influencing landowners. yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think there is a role for organisations like the National Trust, the Woodland Trust, Forestry Commission, and the other ENGOs and government agencies to collectively advocate for ancient trees and dead and dying trees better. And that's the only way we can do it, really. I think, I think, with the best will in the world, an individual tree officer, I know, our tree officers are brilliant. They do the best they can with the individuals they meet, but they're only going to achieve so much in those limited conversations. So I think it is for us as a sector to share these messages as best we can.
Yeah, thanks, Luke.
Can I just respond to that as well, Richard?
Yeah, sure.
Just to say that, as I would say this as a social scientist, but it's all about asking them, listening, active listening. Ask them, why is it that they want to remove them? If it is around sort of perceptions of others, whether that's public or other farmers or things, you can use this evidence to sort of explain. And so often farmers are concerned about what others think about them, especially other farmers. I think if it's risk management, it's quite difficult, especially if they've got public rights of way on their land. So I think that's something that probably is a bit more of a difficult issue. But there's also, as we've shown from this evidence, like explaining the benefits that they might receive from it. And I've worked a lot with farmers over my career, and I think actually if you spend some time actually trying to understand what it is that they're concerned about and why they're moving it, actually it's you might be able to sort of address the issues more specifically.
Thanks, Beth. I do a lot of blame onto Edward VII, King Edward VII. He was I think he must have been on the spectrum slightly, but he was obsessed with cleanliness and painting stones and raking gravel. And I think he took Capability Brown and Repton to the absolute extreme. So there's a sort of a culture that we still working on to bring back scruffiness into the countryside with acceptance.
Can I come quickly on that one, Richard? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
That was something I was thinking about earlier, actually, when you asked about the National Trust perspective, which is that actually it's really got me thinking that in my 20 years as a ranger and sort of 6 years in an advisory role, I can't remember actually having dealt with a complaint from a visitor about dead trees on the sites that I've worked on or been involved with. What I have dealt with on a number of occasions is complaints from heritage professionals about dead trees in Parkland, which is what you're coming to, that they're not appropriate in Parkland. When actually, if you go back to Capability Brown and how he incorporated old trees into his landscapes and the reasons he did so for that sense of drama and antiquity, he could live with dead trees. And lots of the sort of old historic landscape designers could live with that, the drama and the majesty of dead trees. And actually, it's over the last century or so, with the industrialization of agriculture and the fact that we've overgrazed lots of our parklands, that sense of tidiness has come in. That I take your point about that king. It was Edward VII. So I don't know about that. Fair, really interesting to know. But actually, I think that tidiness thing is quite a recent phenomenon in our parklands and countryside. And if we go back to the genesis of lots of these design landscapes that are so full of ancient trees and dead trees, we would have seen a lot more untidiness in them.
Yeah, I think you're right, Luke. And actually, coming from Norfolk, you have Sandringham and then all the other big estates following whatever Sandringham does. And I think in the Edward VII period, there was a lot done in that point. But I think you're right. I've just finished a book on Capability Brown, and I think he was an artist as well, and he had and ancient trees and even dead trees would be part of that artistry of the landscape he was creating, and he doesn't seem to have it in for dead trees at all in that sort of way.
Just on that one, so I can't help but chip in, but there's a favourite quote that Humphrey Repton once said, which was that in his observations on the theory and practice of landscape gardening, so this is 1803, but he basically said that the person of science and of taste will discover the beauties in a tree which the others would condemn for its decay. So yeah, I do peddle that one at every opportunity to bring some balance to that conversation. But yeah, I'd agree with Luke. I think it's the industrial, it's the technology we now have at our fingertips that make it appealing, I guess, to overmanage sites to the nth degree, whereas historically that wouldn't have been the case. So hopefully, we can encourage that balance to come back again.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That leads us into an interesting question from Catherine Manners. It said, would you encourage legislation preventing the taking down of dead and decaying trees from a biodiversity point of view? So many species rely on them. So should there be a legislation in there or a law in there to stop people taking down dead and dying trees? Luke, you
Yeah.
had your hand up.
Nige might have more to say. So one thing I did really want to say today actually is just to toot the ATF horn actually, because our amazing long-standing advocacy volunteer Caroline Davis, who some of you will know, has achieved real success actually with um, changing the TPO legislation in England so that you still have to give 5 days notice of your intent to remove a dead TPO'd tree, when a dead tree would formerly have been exempt from the need to give notice or get TPO consent. So that was real progress quite recently from Caroline, which was absolutely fantastic. I think just on that note, we have got the NPPF review, the National Planning Policy Framework, open for consultation at the moment, with some interesting and difficult stuff in there around the treatment of ancient trees and how dead trees are treated, both of which should be irreplaceable habitat, but the devil's in the detail around the legal wording. As lots of you will know, recently there's been a case where a planning authority has made a challenging judgment, I think, for those of us who are really interested in the conservation of old trees. So I don't want to get too far into the NPPF. I think there is a role for legislation, in my personal view. I think the time is now, though, for some of us to get involved with that consultation into the NPPF, because it's a really timely one. Nigel, I know, is involved with some stuff that might have relevance to this. I'm not sure what his thoughts are.
Yeah, good. I was going to come to you.
Sorry,
Nigel. Yeah, your thoughts on from that one?
Yeah, thank you. I think all of the folks on this course, the vast majority, would love to see greater protection for ancient veteran trees, including those veteran trees that have died. It's interesting that there was a Tree Council report last year protecting trees of high social, cultural, and environmental value, and that suggested, I think, eight different actions that could be taken in progressing the greater protection of ancient veteran trees. It's well worth a read. There's some really useful actions in there. Interestingly, although felling does occur and ancient veteran trees are lost through felling, there are a lot more issues caused by poor management of ancient and veteran trees. People not understanding the fantastic resource that they've got and managing poorly around those trees, farming too close to them, not having appropriate stocking, all of those sorts of things, causing compaction and poaching and all the things that we're all aware of that impact on veteran trees. And so actually there's a bigger role there for education, the sort of education that Beth was maybe alluding to, ensuring that land managers understand the resource that they've got, understand the massive value of these trees, and actually some education that helps people not only understand them, but perhaps some funding that maybe helps people actually do some of the actions that enable them to safeguard these trees, make them take them on for another few generations.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Catherine, we had going back, changing slight direction from the questions, going back to your research. David Hales asked, what proportion of the interviewees were environmentally aware? Was there a way of knowing if they were aware, as it were?
Yeah, the two ways that we looked at that was through the nature relatedness scores, which I mentioned. So that's a tried and tested way of asking people, trying to establish sort of how related they are to nature, and I can put a link to the there's more information in the report, the main report, about that and how that's calculated. We also, as I mentioned, we collated a knowledge score, so where we and I appreciate someone's put there's lots of different ways of knowing. There is, when you're dealing with a very limited survey questionnaire, you have to make some difficult decisions about how you define these things. But in this case, we talked about knowledge of these trees and around sort of how they independently brought up knowledge of benefits or ecosystem services. Like I said, we didn't use that term, but we gathered that. So those were the two ways that we assessed, and actually both nature relatedness and levels of knowledge did have a significant effect on the responses to some of those questions.
Mm, mm. So that wasn't a question you asked at the beginning, as it were, of the in the interviews. You didn't ask whether they were sort of environmentally aware as such. It was just a questionnaire, was it?
Well, it's very hard to, you can't, that's a very
Mm.
open-ended question, isn't it? So we tried to be more systematic by using those tested scores, and the sort of a way of sort of more objectively measuring knowledge then, because I think everyone would probably say, oh yeah, kind of fairly, but that doesn't really give us very much, does it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's more about actually trying to more objectively measure those
Yeah.
things using tried and tested metrics.
Yeah. It's difficult, isn't it, to get those questions right, and not leading, as you say, in that respect. We've got a couple of questions which are sort of fairly close. So one from Jocelyn Cohen said, do you have any suggestions on how to approach a park, a historic site, or a public garden that has ancient and veteran trees at risk of removal? And then Elaine G has also sort of talked about what is the danger of a left monolith, suggesting a copper beech that was on a nature reserve, and that one arboriculturist said that it could be retained as a monolith, but on the day they decided that it had to be felled because they felt it was dangerous. So how do you sort of approach, if you see a tree, how do you approach the owners, if you like, for information on what their intention of a tree is? Any sort of ideas on how to broach that subject with people?
I think that might be more of a question for Nigel or Luke or Tom,
Yeah, so
than me.
I was waiting for Luke or Tom or Nigel's microphone to come off as
Yeah, no, so I was thinking hard about that one, Richard. Again, not something that I deal with too much in the day job. I suppose it is relevant when we might visit National Trust sites and meet the rangers who might have a different perspective to ours, or through our work with the Ancient Tree Forum when we go to landowners. And I think it does come back to what Beth said earlier about influencing people. It's about listening. It's building relationships. Typically it's about getting out under the trees, sharing why we find them so special and what's so important about them in terms of all those wonderful ecosystem services, and then listening to their perspective. And that's the only way we find out anything, or gain any ability to influence in the direction that we'd like to see, isn't it? So I think it all comes down to people and relationships, and those respectful interactions.
Yeah. It's one of those difficult ones. Unless you are, you need to talk, and because if you don't ask, you don't get, as it were. But at the same time, it's you've got to respect both sides and listen to the discussions. But we have another question from somebody who, as a dyslexic, has really tested me. So I think it's Ashlyn Monte Hayden Fardo, if I think is the actual name, if I've done that right. They say, did the research identify how best to engage with visitors who had a negative perception of deadwood, i.e., through direct interactions or social media? Did people use deadwood as a negative, as it were, Beth?
We didn't do any intervention testing, so that could be a follow-up stage. So this was all around sort of trying to answer those research questions up front. But the next stage could be testing some suggested interventions. So it could be testing different forms of communications. It could be doing some more work, maybe like someone mentioned earlier, it's not always just about the members of the public. Sometimes it's about land managers, maybe garden design managers that have a specific idea about what things should look like, and trying to sort of maybe do some discussion forums with different groups to try and get perspectives on what it should look like. So yeah, I think some intervention testing could be an interesting next step, and it'd be good to do that really properly with a sort of a robust sort of monitoring and evaluation framework.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I don't know, Luke.
Yeah, I was just you just got me thinking about something which the National Trust Head of Gardens showed us recently, which wasn't a National Trust garden, and to my shame, I can't remember where it was, but a really brilliant landscape designer had incorporated dead trees into their sort of modern garden design, but they drilled sort of geometric patterns into the trees so that they very clearly looked designed and part of the landscape. And, you know, again, the perception of the visitors apparently there was, you know, they didn't even question them as being part of the design, you know, and they looked beautiful, you know, even to my eye with the intervention. It was very sort of tasteful. And yeah, I'll try and dig it out because I really thought it was fantastic, actually. And it was great that she was showing all our gardeners in the National Trust this as well, which was really positive.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And actually, it's interesting in the National Trust garden books how many ancient and veteran trees, but also dead trees that feature in the photographic editions, as it were, in the books themselves. Which means that, you know, they're not left out because they're aesthetically unpleasing, as it were, which is really good. We have a question from James Allen. Are there examples of local authority policies or inspection approaches that successfully balance the ecological value of standing deadwood with public safety duties? Are there proven defensible when decisions are being challenged? Nigel, I don't know whether that fits a sort of a process from Natural England, or whether any of the others have any options. I'm not.
It might need Luke or Tom to come in on that one with their knowledge of managing visitors for the National Trust. One of the things I was just thinking about reflecting on was the health and safety of managing trees. We were talking about the beech monolith and the challenge that presents to people. And certainly, if you can imagine, if you were a private individual owning a large site with standing dead trees on it and large amounts of public access, it would make you nervous. So how we maybe sort of start to challenge some of those going to say knee-jerk reactions to health and safety, but that's maybe being a bit unkind. How we challenge the perceptions that something immediately needs to be felled, and support people to make different decisions in restricting access around those trees potentially, or taking a different approach to the management, the health and safety management of those trees. But I'll pass on to Luke or Tom to maybe take that question in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I'm really happy to. I don't want to hog the mic if Tom wants to.
Go for it, Luke. No worries.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think you know, this is definitely something that we do deal with a lot in the National Trust. Both Tom and I are really closely involved with our tree safety management work, as well as our sort of woody conservation work. And you know, what we always have to bring it back down to when we're training our teams or making decisions in support of people out on the ground is that we need to do what is reasonable in terms of tree safety management. And the definition of what is reasonable in terms of tree safety management, as defined in the NTSG guidance, the National Tree Safety Group guidance, is that we balance the genuine level of risk with the very many benefits that trees provide. And what that means for us in practical terms is that there are some places where we can't tolerate a dead tree. When we zone our sites, when we've got higher use places or by a busy road, we're not going to leave a dead tree standing there because it is destined to fail at some point, and the chances of it hurting someone or even someone driving into it, you know, are high. But, you know, we're really clear actually that on our lower use paths, the lowest level of use that we do actually still inspect the trees, we can tolerate some dead trees because even though they're destined to fail, the chances of them hurting someone are so low that it's not reasonable for us to go and remove each one of those. And that's the kind of measure that we need to take in our judgments. Yeah, but it is challenging, and it does come down to judgment and knowledgeable people and having the confidence in those decisions.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Good answer. Beth?
I just wanted to flag that I've put a link in the chat. My team has done some research on this, on public perceptions of treescape creation, expansion, management and maintenance, including for urban trees. So that might be of interest to people.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Beth. Okay, last couple of questions. One from Ian Hannah. Are you aware of any parallel research going on in other countries? Maybe those that are much more culturally engaged with trees, maybe the Basque region of Spain. Is the parallel research data exists? Could it give any clues about how to engage with the public to improve the knowledge of appreciation of ancient, veteran or dead trees?
We did a literature review before we embarked on the research, and there is some, so that's in the main report. that's there's a list of the references we found. Yeah, we didn't find a lot from the UK. There are other examples from the US and Europe in particularly of looking at this. Quite a range of different methods used. Very few actually interview people outside. A lot of it was based on sort of photos and things, and it was a real mix in terms of response. I wouldn't say other countries necessarily have better reactions to these trees than we do, and it also depends on the context you look at. Quite a lot of them were looking at commercial forests and sort of die off of entire stands. So yeah, there is some research out there. We do list what we found in the report, but I wouldn't say it's a very straightforward narrative.
No, it sounds like that it's a subject for the many conferences that will happen this year. Looking at the sort of appreciation in Europe as much as in this country. It'd be an interesting piece of research, if nothing else, you know. So, okay, so last question then to you actually comes from one of the expert panel members. So it you know, from member to member. What was the thing that struck you most from the research, and how did it challenge your expectations?
Yeah, thank you. That's a nice question. To be honest, most of it surprised me. I have to be honest. I was expecting there to be a lot more negative perceptions of dead and decaying trees. And I think it's because of that, what you mentioned, Richard, about this idea that we're a nation of tidies. And that just didn't come across in the findings. I mean, again, we're going back to it's a subsection of the population that likes to visit these landscapes. So I'm not saying it's across the board. We all know that tidy gardeners and things, but that really surprised me. And also the level of knowledge people had. That really surprised me as well. Like, I think it was nearly over a quarter cited three separate ecosystem services that dead and decaying trees provide, including things like nutrient cycling people are talking about. So I think maybe we sometimes underestimate the knowledge and interest of the public at large.
Yeah, we underestimate them at our peril. I think it's fascinating, and it's being controversial. It's gardeners and farmers are, you know, maybe there is an element of, you know, there's an overriding influence, if you like, on the sterilization of monocultures, and we need to we need to chill a bit and relax a bit in certain things, which I think comes across nicely certainly in gardeners' world now. If you listen to Monty Don, he's less rabid about sterilization than he was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. So we'll get there. We'll get there, I'm sure.
I think we sometimes assume we know what other people think, and we don't always.
We don't. No, it's fascinating. Beth, Nigel, and Luke and Tom, thanks ever so much for that. We have to pull it to a close because we're 1 minute from our allotted time. That was fascinating, and I really appreciate not only the people answering the questions, but for you, Beth, for you coming to do the research. It sparks a lot of questions in your mind, and I'm sure there'll be more research coming up and adding to the value of what you've done without a shadow of doubt. And it's that understanding of people's perceptions and how they've changed over time is fascinating. And going forward, I'm sure people will appreciate it more. And all those that are on this call, we all have a role in changing and influencing people's perceptions of not only ancient and veteran trees, but also the way they sit in the countryside and how they are part of our lives forever, as it were. So thank you for those. Please subscribe to Ancient Tree newsletter through the Ancient Tree website. If you're not already clicked in, click on and get more information from us from the newsletters. Support your local ATF groups. We do lots and lots of visits and talks where a lot of this discussion can happen actually in the field, looking at the trees at the same time. And I've been on many of our local groups site visits, and I can recommend them. They are really, really good. And if you're following this webinar, we will send you an evaluation form. So it'd be good to know what you thought was good or bad, and that helps us change for the next one, and keep an eye out for that gift aid form as well. So thank you for your support. Thank you to our speakers, and go off and you go forth into the rest of your evening and enjoy. Thanks ever so much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.